A very good morning. Welcome to Sky News Breakfast. I'm Jonathan Samuels. And we start with a growing number of countries introducing COVID restrictions on travellers arriving from China. Last night, the US became the latest to say all arrivals from China will have to provide a negative test result. But the UK government has said it currently has no plans to follow suit. Well, it all comes after doctors in China reported that some hospitals are overwhelmed by the numbers of people dying from COVID, despite the country recently easing its tough restrictions. Well, the United States, India, Italy, Japan and Taiwan, South Korea and Malaysia said they will now require COVID tests for travellers from China. Among the countries who say they will not impose additional restrictions on travel for now are the UK, Germany, Thailand, Australia as well.
Well, we'll continue to monitor the circumstances that are occurring in China and in other parts of the world as well as we do. We'll take the appropriate advice from the health experts and follow that advice. There's no change in the travel advice at this point in time, but we're continuing to monitor the situation as we continue to monitor the impact of COVID here in Australia as well as around the world. Our priority is to keep Australians as safe as possible.
The Australian Prime Minister there. Joining me now is our Asia correspondent, Cordelia Lynch. And as we were just saying, Cordelia, there's quite a disparity, isn't there, between different countries and their approach to this?
This stage, there is a big gulf. We see America and Italy testing those arriving from China immediately. Those, of course, are two countries that faced the full force of COVID-19 in the first outbreak back in 2020. But we have UK saying they are not going to reintroduce COVID-19 restrictions now. We may see this change, though, in the days and weeks to come. It's a fluid situation. The situation in China is that it has decided to open up, in part, we think really from political pressure. It is no longer publicising its COVID-19 rates, its death toll either, and some of the hospitals we've been speaking to in northern China are certainly under pressure. This is a country with a low vaccination rate, and we're seeing the elderly becoming particularly sick. In the Lunar New Year as well, we're going to see Chinese travellers potentially in the countryside returning with COVID cases. So there is a real worry in China about a further outbreak and a potential death toll with a health infrastructure that is struggling with this. But look, this is a world where people are keen to move on, not to be yet again hampered by COVID cases and the travel restrictions that were enforced on them previously. So at the moment, UK standing their ground, not moving, but others not willing to take that risk.
Cordelia, thank you. I just want to update you on Ukraine with some breaking news that we've had in the last few minutes. A Ukraine official has reported a new wave of Russian missiles hitting Kyiv. One blast has been heard in the capital, but the president's office says more than 100 missiles were incoming across the country. It comes as Russia's foreign minister, Sergei Lavrov, has rejected Volodymyr Zelensky's peace formula as a basis for negotiations. Lavrov said Kyiv's idea of driving Russia out of eastern Ukraine and Crimea with Western help was an illusion. So breaking news, a Ukraine official has reported a new wave of Russian missile attacks this morning on Kyiv. At least one blast has been heard in the capital. We will, of course, keep across the situation in Ukraine throughout the morning for you. Back here, there are fears of coordinated strikes in the new year as the new boss of the TUC says the government is sabotaging efforts to resolve them. I'm going to speak to him at 8:30, get his thoughts. Right now, though, let's speak to our political correspondent, Mari Aurora, who's in Westminster. I mean, many people will be thinking this sounds a little bit like a potential general strike.
It really will, Jonathan. I think in some ways this could potentially escalate to a situation where it's a general strike in everything apart from name, essentially. But I think it would be interesting to see how Paul Nowak speaks to you this morning. So we've got that interview at 8:30 on Sky News, and he's going to be speaking to you about these strikes and the industrial action. I think we can expect him to realistically criticise the government's response to the strikes and the fact that they're still not budging on pay. I think we can expect that from him. I think we can also expect him to comment on, as you say, those rumours, those potential suggestions from certain union bosses like Mark Sawatka yesterday, who told Sky News there was potentially going to be some level of synchronisation or coordination between several unions on strikes to try and team up and maximise disruption. So I think we can expect him to comment on that as well. And also, obviously, we can expect him to defend workers and the fact that they are striking. I mean, this morning, Paul Nowak, he said that striking workers have been left with absolutely no choice as to striking after 10 years of pay cuts. And he's also accused ministers of sabotaging the efforts to reach settlement. So, at the moment, the unions are really ramping up the rhetoric. They're really not dialing down the rhetoric. They're really ramping it up. And I think those tensions between the unions and the government are only going to escalate unless somebody decides to compromise, somebody decides to budge, get around that table and find a solution. At the moment, it doesn't look like it's possible. The government are really staying tight-lipped on those pay rises, and therefore, so far, they're not budging.
OK, Murray in Westminster, thank you. A fire burning through a Cambodian hotel casino on the border with Thailand has killed at least 10 people. Local police say at least 30 people are injured. The fire broke out at around midnight at the Grand Diamond Casino and Hotel in Popeti. There was an extraordinary rescue when 2 people were seen hanging onto the jib of a crane as a way of escaping the building. The arm was moved away from the hotel and lowered so the people rescued could climb down to safety. Houses have been encased in ice. Millions have lost power and at least 65 people have now died during the bomb cyclone that's been battering large parts of North America. Even as the weather eases, disruption continues to mount. More than 20,000 flights have been cancelled in the United States since the 22nd of December. That's according to FlightAware. As many as 1.8 million properties were without power across the US, although services have now been restored in most areas. New York State, the hardest hit region, will receive federal support after President Biden approved an emergency declaration. And in the city of Buffalo, the National Guard has been drafted in to enforce a driving ban, ensuring the only vehicles on the roads are those of the emergency services. Our US correspondent James Matthews reports.
This is how cold it's been. These are houses frozen on the shores of Lake Erie, a street in ice sculpture. The temperatures have taken their toll across North America. The reach of this bomb cyclone has extended across thousands of miles and several days. It has gripped millions of people. Upstate New York continues to struggle through the effects of this human tragedy. They are still counting its victims. Casey Macarone lost her mother on Christmas Eve after she'd gone outside in freezing conditions in the city of Buffalo. Monique Alexander was later found dead in the street, partially buried in snow.
She was a hustler. She was a caretaker.
In the city of Buffalo, heavy machinery has been brought in for roadside rescue, while police enforce a driving ban. Nothing and no one is going anywhere quickly.
It's been tough because the driving ban is still in effect for the city of Buffalo. And so we haven't really left our house in about a week. I know most of the stores that have been open, they have not been able to get new deliveries of any goods. And so if people are able to go to corner stores or supermarkets that have been reopening, the shelves are bare.
Fatalities have included people found in their homes and stranded in their vehicles. There is a state of emergency, but there's anger at the state of affairs. In Erie County, one arm of local government is blaming another.
Mayor's not going to be happy to hear about it, but storm after storm after storm after storm, the city, unfortunately, is the last one to be opened, and that shouldn't be the case. It's embarrassing, to tell you the truth. And if we have to, working with the state, we will find a way to get through these storms quicker by taking over operations if need be. And I know the mayor's probably not thrilled to hear it. I don't care anymore. I want it done.
Did you buy it? Huh? Did you buy it? I'm trying to buy it. All right, put it back. Put everything back. Come on.
There have been numerous reports of looting.
Come on.
These are pictures from a supermarket in Buffalo. It is grim here, and it isn't over. As temperatures pick up, there are dangers presented by this snow melting in these quantities. As they dig themselves out, they are digging in for the prospect of floods to follow. James Matthews, Sky News, Washington.
Well, the UK is going to feel the effects of the US bomb cyclone that's been battering parts of America, as we've just seen. The Met Office has issued a yellow weather warning for heavy rain in parts of Scotland. It's in effect from tomorrow. Let's get more on this from our meteorologist, Joe Wheeler, who joins us now. Good to see you again, Joe. And it does often happen, doesn't it, that we tend to get the effects of big weather events in the United States sometime later. And that's going to happen again, is it? But not snow and ice, but more wet weather.
Yes, indeed. In fact, weather impacts on weather right across the world, because driving every weather system, we've got the jet stream. And really what's happened with this winter storm is that it's given a real bump to the jet stream, and that's going to drive these low pressure systems towards us. So you've got two things going with the American storm. First of all, those incredibly low temperatures, minus 40 degrees Celsius, rarely seen in a lifetime. And not only that, the very cold air sank a long way southwards down towards Florida. Now, of course, by that time, it's running into very mild air, very warm air indeed. And that is what's driving the jet stream. So really, the temperature gradient has just made that jet stream stronger and stronger. And so this is where we start to feel the impact, because the jet stream then starts pushing these weather systems towards us, and quite vigorously as well. So in fact, over the next few days, for us, it's looking changeable. We're going to see showers, longer spells of rain, but along with that, also some very strong winds, and everything is moving through really quite fast. And in between, you get these periods of slightly colder conditions as well. So yesterday, we saw just over 13 degrees Celsius, which is pretty impressive for December, around 55 degrees Fahrenheit. Today, the higher we're likely to see is only around 9 or 10 degrees Celsius. And then we'll start to see the milder conditions coming back. But yes, this rain that comes through in the early hours of tonight likely to be quite impactful for parts of Scotland, northwestern parts of England. And again, it's going to be accompanied by these winds gusting to 45, even 50 miles per hour. And of course, where we've had not only recent rain, but also some snow runoff, there is a risk there of some flooding.
OK, Joe in Lincolnshire, thank you. Sun just beginning to come up in Lincolnshire. Thank you very much. Now, smoking is proving to be a hard habit to break. Cancer Research UK is now warning of 1 million more cancer cases by 2040 if nothing changes. They're also calling for consultation to raise the age of the sale of tobacco. You may remember adverts like these from a few years ago.
Every 15 cigarettes you smoke will cause a mutation. If you could see the damage, you'd stop.
Oh, gruesome, aren't they, those adverts? Well, according to Cancer Research UK, data up to 2018 showed the government was 7 years off track from meeting its 2030 smoke-free target. The latest data suggests if recent trends continue, the target will now not be met until 2039. And while smoking rates are declining, in order to reach this goal, smoking rates need to drop around 70% faster. Failure to do so could lead to around 1 million cancer cases in the UK between now and 2040. Our correspondent, Matthew Thompson, is with me now in the studio. Matthew, a lot of people are thinking, aren't they, this time of year about New Year's resolutions, perhaps giving up smoking finally. 2023 is the year it's going to happen. But it does need to happen, doesn't it? And according to this research, probably quicker than it is.
Yes, and it's certainly not happening fast enough if this Cancer Research UK report is to be believed. They actually mention New Year's resolutions in it. It's as good a time as any to be talking about stopping smoking. But frankly, the government are not anywhere near their own stated target, that is, of keeping England smoke-free or getting England smoke-free by 2030. It was a target set in 2019. It's defined as having 5% of the population smoking. Incidentally, currently, the latest figures we have from about 2019 suggest that the figures are about 14% at the moment. They are dropping, but they're not dropping fast enough. Cancer Research UK says that on current trends, it will not hit its target until 2039, so 9 years later than is currently the set government target. You might remember in the summer there was a review by Dr. Javed Khan, the Khan review, into precisely this issue. It found that, commissioned by the government incidentally, it found that the government was 7 years behind targets. The implication from today's figures is that that target is slipping yet further from the summer. You might also remember the Khan review implemented a couple of recommendations, the headline one of which was to increase the age of being able to purchase tobacco from 18 by 1 year every year until such time as no one in the UK can actually buy any tobacco. The government has yet to respond to that review in any way, and so Cancer Research UK is saying today that they need to do so ASAP. Cancer Research UK says, incidentally, that the smoking is the leading cause of both cancer and preventable deaths in the UK. Around 500,000 hospital admissions every year are attributable to cancer. So clearly, stopping people smoking can have a major impact on public health. Cancer Research UK says that it's not going fast enough. In principle, the government has committed to reducing smoking in England. In practice, they're lagging slightly. They have sent us a statement, which we should read to you. They say that the government remains committed to its smoke-free ambition by 2030, and the action we're taking means smoking rates in England are at an all-time low. They say that they are considering those Khan review recommendations that I mentioned, and they will set out their next steps in due course.
OK, Matthew, thank you for that. Let's take a look at some of the day's other news now. Police are still questioning two men over the murder of 23-year-old Cody Fisher at a nightclub in Birmingham. Cody was celebrating Christmas with his friends at the Crane nightclub when he was stabbed. A 22-year-old man has been arrested in the Midlands and a 21-year-old man held in London on suspicion of murder. Friends of the footballer laid flowers at the scene, saying they're struggling to process what happened.
Just the impact it's had on myself, family, friends. I mean, obviously me and Kelsey are part of a friendship group which has a hole now that can't be filled. I was out the night it happened and it hit me like a ton of bricks. Like I said, he just had an infectious smile, a love for life, his friends, his football, his family, and it just tragic, just horrendous, really, really horrible. And I know for me, it's I can't get to grips with it.
Elon Musk has said he believes his Tesla car firm will be the most valuable company on Earth. That's despite its shares losing 70% of their value this year over falling demand for electric cars and his problems at Twitter. The family of rapper Theophilus London have filed a missing persons report. They say he hasn't been seen for months. The musician's family and friends believe someone last spoke to him in July in Los Angeles. He was last spotted in the Skid Row area in October. To China, where there's been a huge pile-up of at least 100 cars. At least one person died in the crash. The accident happened in thick fog, with cars and trucks piling into each other and eventually stacking up on top of other vehicles. It all happened on a bridge in the Chinese city of Shenzhou. Many people were trapped inside their vehicles before emergency services were called to the scene. Just terrifying. Now, firefighters could go on strike over pay after the Firefighters Brigade Union said they're facing in-work poverty, whilst bosses are being paid up to 6 times more than an ordinary firefighter's wage. Well, the union has already rejected a 5% pay offer. The ballot result is due at the end of January. I'm joined now by the FBU General Secretary, Matt Rack. A very good morning to you. So are firefighters going to go on strike, do you think?
Good morning. Well, we're in the middle of a ballot, as you say. It's a secret ballot. I won't know the results of that till the end of January, but all the indications are that there's a huge amount of anger out there among our members. This isn't just this year. This is 12 years of stagnating pay, driven by central government, unfortunately, but also by fire service employers and fire chiefs. And we keep being told to tighten our belts like workers across the country. And firefighters are telling us they've had enough. They are struggling to pay the bills. And that's why we've ended up in this situation with us balloting, unfortunately, for industrial action. People are not prepared to take this any longer. And they're telling us they want to fight back.
Is it responsible for a key emergency service to go on strike?
Well, of course, nobody wants to go on strike. Nobody joins the fire service to go on strike. But at the end of the day, people have to pay the bills, and it comes to breaking point. And we have people, as you've reported, in some cases even using food banks, reported by their own employers that that's happening. It's acknowledged that pay has fallen significantly year after year, real wages falling, and eventually people have to look after their families. And the government needs to step in, put money into public services, including the fire service, to provide decent funding for decent pay to stop living standards falling.
Yeah, I was just looking at the figures. Once fully qualified, firefighters' basic salary in London will increase to £38,340 to £39,325 per annum.
That's right.
The average salary, is that right? The average salary in the UK, £38,600.
No. Just you need to compare apples with apples. It's the basics of statistical honesty. You're conflating London figures with national figures. The national figure for a competent firefighter is £32,000 a year. That's the salary of a competent firefighter after several years of training. So you're using incorrect figures. And
I'm quoting the London figures, 39,325.
In that case, you would need to compare the London figure with the London wage, wouldn't you, rather than comparing the London figure?
So there's not a lot of difference.
Let me finish. You've asked a question. Asked a question. If you're going to compare a London salary of a firefighter, you need to compare it with the London salary of an average worker, and that's not what you're doing. You're twisting the facts. Get your facts right if you're going to ask questions.
OK, you tell me what the figures are then, because the figures on your website say that this is from your website. It says £39,325 is what a qualified firefighers' basic salary in London.
That's not taken from our website. The competent firefighter's wage in the UK is £32,244. So I don't know where you've got your figures from.
OK, well, let's talk about what the government says, because the government says that if they give a double-digit pay rise, it's going to fuel inflation even further, and that is going to make the cost of living crisis last even longer.
Well, this is just nonsense, because there is no evidence that the pay of public sector workers has caused inflation whatsoever. So instead of simply repeating government spin to people, you should look at the facts. Inflation has been caused by factors far outside our control. Our members, as other workers, have had to be told for more than a decade to tighten their belts, while the richest people in this society get richer and richer. Corporations make bigger and bigger profits. The government just a few weeks ago was willing to hand out £45 billion in tax cuts to the wealthiest in society, but tell working people that they need to tighten their belts and their families just have to make do. That's simply not acceptable, and millions of people across the country are saying it's not acceptable. That's what lies behind our dispute and the other disputes that you're seeing across the country.
Yeah, talking about those disputes, the General Secretary of the PCSU says it's a matter of time before we see synchronised strikes. Is that something you'd support?
Well, if people are facing a common attack, which is on their living standards, why would they not work together to try and force that attack back? So, yes, we will talk to other unions. We're in a dispute for ourselves, which is about firefighters' pay with our employers and the funding necessary for the government to resolve that. But other workers are in a very similar position. And yes, of course, workers talk to each other and trade unions talk to each other. It's simply common sense.
Is there not a fear, though, that you'll lose public support? If we have a situation that is essentially a general strike, won't the public get seriously fed up?
Well, I think the experience we've got is that millions of ordinary people across the country are sick and tired of the richest people in society be given dodgy contracts during COVID, tax cuts, and seeing the profits of big corporations boosted year after year after year, while ordinary people are told there is no money for them. It's simply ludicrous. During the pandemic, our members and others were called COVID heroes. They were clapped by the Prime Minister. They kept essential services going. And as soon as that crisis begins to ease, we're told there's no money for any rewards and that people need to take further pay cuts. How long should people carry on taking pay cuts? It's simply nonsense and it's not acceptable.
OK, we must leave it there. The results of that ballot, Matt, you did say end of January, was it?
30th of January, yeah.
OK, we'll find out more then. For now, Matt Rack from the FBU, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Good morning, welcome back. You're watching Sky News Breakfast. Now, millions of adults with health problems and struggling with the cost of living crisis are living in cold and damp homes. New figures show more than 9 million people are affected this month alone, with some conditions so bad even their clothes are mouldy, as Sky's Sada Chowdhury reports.
I've got a heater there, which again is obviously expensive, but I try and use that to help the problem. There's an electric dehumidifier there. There's 2 more chemical dehumidifiers down the side, so I've got a whole army of things to try and solve the problem.
Nothing short of an army will do for the battle Jonathan is up against at home. Look around his flat and all you see are rows of dehumidifiers.
And what I discovered this morning was that actually my clothes have started to mould as well.
It spreads fast, especially when it's cold.
Thing that's causing the whole problem is the incredible cost of electric heating. We don't have gas central heating here, we only have electric heaters, and that means it's very hard to heat, very expensive, and also you get bigger problems with mould.
Millions of adults across the UK who have pre-existing serious health issues are living in similar conditions. Data released today shows that 18% of the population live in cold, damp homes. And for a quarter of people with health conditions, their illnesses are made worse by cold and damp because they can't heat their homes to a safe standard. The Department for Levelling Up, Housing and Communities says, we are providing cost of living payments worth £1,200 to the 8 million most vulnerable families to help this winter. This is in addition to capping people's energy bills this winter and next. That funding isn't new, and according to campaigners, it leaves many people out.
For those people like Jonathan who are struggling on electric-only heaters, the cost of lifting them out of fuel poverty, of them being able to heat their home to an acceptable standard, is much higher. So they will need much more support to help them stay warm this winter.
I can see some under there, so I'll zap it with my bleach and rub hard. And like some of it kind of rubs off, but then the bleach kind of does its work in the next hour or so. So in like an hour, that bleach would have kind of killed off that bit. And then tomorrow morning, I'll find another spot somewhere.
It is simply relentless. Sadia Chowdhury, Sky News in Buckinghamshire.
Now, an Ohio police officer had a close shave when a truck slid off a motorway in the deadly snow conditions in the US. Dashcam footage shows the police officer spotting the truck careering out of control down the carriageway. Wow, he jumped out of the way just in time. The truck slid on the ice, smashed into his patrol car, but thankfully, as you can see there, the patrol officer was unhurt. Scary stuff. Let's get the weather here in the UK.
Warm memories wherever you go. The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
It's going to be unsettled this week with further spells of wind and rain. There'll be a windy, generally frost-free start today with a scattering of showers, but eastern Britain will be mostly fine. The morning will bring sunny spells and further blustery showers, with the showers mainly in the north and west and wintry on northern hills. It'll be reasonably mild, but still very windy, with gales near western coasts. Showers will continue over northern and western parts.
The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
Now, this year, inflation reached over 11%, its highest rate since 1981. And although we may have passed the peak, households are continuing to feel the squeeze, and the country is still in the grip of a series of strikes, as we've been reporting. Our economics and data editor, Ed Conway, has unpicked the impact of a year shaped by the cost of living crisis and an ill-fated mini-budget.
2022, what a year. Let's have a look at some of the charts that defined it, starting with perhaps the most striking one of all. This is inflation, the Consumer Price Index, CPI. This is the annual rate, basically prices going up. And have a look. In October, it got up to 11.1%. That was the highest that we've seen since going all the way back to 1981. And the funny thing is, when that rises, you get all sorts of other things going on in the economy as well. Let me put a line for strikes on top of it. We're just superimposing a different line, different axis, but look at how similar the shapes are. When inflation's low, you don't get as many strikes. When inflation's high, you do tend to get more strikes, and that's exactly what we are, experiencing at the moment. And if past this prologue, that's also going to push that red line up even further. So more strikes in the future. Now, what is it that's driving up prices? Well, it's a lot of things, but above all, it's this, gas prices, wholesale gas prices. And just look at how low they were through 2007, 2008, going all the way through till about 2021. So just before the invasion of Ukraine, it got up really sharp. And you can see on the 26th of August in 2022, that is a record, the highest ever, £5.50 a thermos. Some people think it's going to stay high for a long time, longer even than the government expects. So important thing there. Of course, the consequence of all of this is it goes into our pockets, doesn't it? Real household disposable income is a really good measure of just whether we're getting better off or worse off. So anything above the line is getting better off, growth. Anything below the line is the opposite. And have a look at what happened in 2022. Look at the bars that come up here. Look, the biggest fall on record. That is why we're all feeling a little bit worse off at the moment, and that is expected to continue in the coming years as well. Final thing, you couldn't really talk about 2022, could you, without talking about the pound and about the mini-budget. Remember, this is the pound against the dollar. Anything going up is the pound getting stronger. We're going back through history. 1985, the Plaza Accord. Up until recently, the lowest it ever got, about $1.05. You've got Black Wednesday. That wasn't a good moment for the government, another Tory government as well. You've got 2016, the EU referendum. Look at these big falls in the pound. Never really recovered from there. But the nadir, the real nadir, was at the mini-budget. The days after the mini-budget, got to the lowest level ever since the creation of the dollar. It's recovered since, but some people think it could plumb those depths again in the future. It just goes to show so many striking charts from 2022. I'm sure there will be more in 2023. Let's hope it's more good news rather than bad news.
OK, time then to take a look at the papers. And with us this morning, Sunday Mirror's political editor Nigel Nelson and Annabel Denham, the Director of Communications at the Institute of Economic Affairs. Great to see you both again this morning. Nigel, why don't you kick off things for us this hour? We're going to speak to him, actually, at about 8:30. The new boss of the TUC, he says workers are ready to strike until the summer. Do you think the public are prepared for that?
Well, I mean, so far the public seem to be blaming the government rather than the strikers for what's been going on. It's the fact that the government actually won't sit down and talk to them. And as you've seen from Ed Conway's rather excellent charts, that we've sort of hit a perfect storm here. You've had a decade of real terms pay cuts, which just don't keep up with inflation. Suddenly inflation starts soaring, and that's when you get strike action. And it's very difficult to see how any of this will actually get resolved unless you can get ministers and the unions sitting around the table and thrashing out some kind of settlement. And what Paul Nowak is saying is that, according to their TUC research, that workers have lost an average of £20,000 in real terms since 2008. And now everyone's just had enough, and that's why you're seeing quite so many sectors going on strike.
OK, we'll get more on that when we speak to him in the next hour. Let's move on, Annabel, to the Times, talking about bank closures. I mean, it's interesting from personal experience. I can't remember the last time I went into a bank because I'm so used to online banking now. I can do it all on there, even pay in cheques online. And I suppose this is the sad inevitability.
You're right, Jonathan. I think we've all seen it. We've seen bank branch closures on our high streets, as well as changes in our own behaviour as we move to digital banking. Yes, so this is a story that's covered in a few newspapers today, that Britain's 5 biggest banks have closed more than half of their branches since 2015, after the number of customers who are using them has collapsed. So, of course, this is being led by customer behaviours and banks' response to that. You know, it feeds into, of course, to the changing face of our high streets, which has been accelerated by the coronavirus pandemic. Really interesting data, actually. I read last month about how we've seen many high streets survive through the pandemic, despite some stores closing, vacancy rates remaining reasonably stable, but a change of use of some of the premises, particularly from retail to cafes and restaurants and bars opening. But of course, there are concerns there. You've got a quote from Alexander Stafford, the Conservative MP, who's worried about financial inclusion, and justifiably so. So I think the government really is going to need to address the fact that we're moving towards a cashless future and find ways of giving as many people as possible access to new technologies so that they're not excluded.
OK, we're going to rattle through these stories. We're a bit short of time this morning, Nigel. So let's talk about eggs, shall we? I don't know if you've had your boiled egg this morning. People will be thinking about breakfast, of course. And this is all about free-range eggs.
Indeed, and I hope to have my free-range eggs after we've done the paper review. But apparently they're coming to an end. What it seems to have happened is that Europe has changed the rules, which means that a free-range egg is classified as coming from a hen who has spent no more than 16 weeks in a barn. I have to say, I always thought they were just pecking around outside. That was the whole point of it. But anyway, the result is the EU will no longer have this kind of 16-week margin. And to keep our farmers competitive, it means that they must follow suit. But it does seem to be a bit disappointing that if you really do go for free-range eggs, very shortly it may be that's not what you're getting.
OK, well, let's stick with the food theme, shall we, Annabelle? This is quite funny, isn't it, in a way? Chips, crisps, jam and wine aren't part of my 5 a day. I mean, are some people trying to kid themselves that they are?
Well, yes, and perhaps particularly so over the festive season. I certainly have been indulging in plenty of crisps and wine. Yes, so this is research that suggests almost 1 in 10 Britons do think that the potatoes and crisps or the fruit in jam go towards that 5 a day target set by the public health bodies, the NHS. You know, that's a surprisingly high figure, though I suppose it should be taken with a pinch of salt, as it's quite a small poll. But nonetheless, analysis in that Daily Mail story suggesting that only a third of adults and 12% of teenagers in England are eating those 5 fruit and vegetables a day. And the NHS is looking at ways of addressing that, creating a new app called Smart 5 a Day that will track the amount of fruit and vegetables that people eat. And I suppose with ongoing obesity levels as they are, the NHS is going to have to think of innovative ways of tackling that. And this is one of them that seems reasonably sensible to me, so long as the cost isn't too high.
Yeah, I mean, Nigel, will people really use an app, do you think, to find out if they're... I mean, if they already think that a glass of wine is part of their one a day, do you think they're going to be clever enough to be able to use an app?
No, I think they're really in trouble, actually, on the basis of that. If you reckon chips are actually good for you. And also the 5 a day thing, I mean, surely people can count from 1 to 5. So I think it's easy enough to know when you've actually reached your 5 a day limit.
Yeah, good point. The app called Smart 5 a Day will tell users if they're eating the right portion sizes and the right foods. Nigel, Annabelle, thank you once again.